You found the skeleton. How would you tell people that is you personally? How would you decide?
Well, interesting question. I don't know. I'd have to do some research on this.
Hey there, YouTube. Welcome back. We last left our Jewish fake rabbi when he was talking about out-of-body experiences being real and just what happens when you dream. Let's see what else he's got for us.
That's it. It's a different world. So now listen good what the Ramban say. The Ramban say, HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't have a beginning and an end. You know, many people ask, who made Hashem?
Yeah, and it's a silly question for people other than small children. One of the biggest aspects of the God concept in most monotheistic religions is that God is the ultimate ground level of reality. He is the ultimate metaphysical necessity. As such, it is incoherent to ask who made such a thing. You can ask whether there's reason to think such a thing exists, or must exist, but if it does, it cannot have a creator. And that fact does not mean it can't or doesn't exist. Now, there are other God concepts out there that go in other directions, like the Mormons' ideas of perhaps infinite generations of God, which would be an infinite regress model of God, but that's not the typical Abrahamic idea.
I'm sure you asked it when you were younger. Who made Hashem? People ask. The kids. Did you ever say to your mother, Mommy, who made Hashem? I'm sure you did. Okay. Now this is a not legitimate question.
Oh, I guess Yosef and I agree on this one. That's nice.
Why? It comes from ignorance. A little kid doesn't know that Hashem is not material. So he's assuming that like everything else in a material world that has a beginning and an end, and someone made it, right? Someone made this tender. Someone made this table. So someone had to make Hashem. That's how a person thinks. But the answer is something spiritual like Hashem is not subject to time. That's why the name of Hashem in Lashon Kodesh is Yud, Hey, Vav, and Hey. Why? Haya, Hoveh, Yeh. All three times, it's present.
I don't really care to comment on the meaning of the Tetragrammaton. That's not a debate I'm going to take a side in. But if spiritual things don't experience time, and that's why God is eternal, does that mean that angels and human souls are also eternal? Are they uncreated? I know that in Islam and Christianity they are seen as created beings and had a beginning, but hey, maybe they don't in Judaism, which seems odd to me, but tell you what, if you're Jewish and reasonably well informed about Jewish theology, let me know in the comments if it is common in Jewish thought to conceive of souls as eternal.
In the moment that Hashem created the world, for 6,000 years, it's basically already over for him at the same second.
I really want to know if he came to that 6,000 figure independently or if he's getting that from Christian creationism. We already know that he's not opposed to Christian creationism being used when it doesn't conflict with his own theology, so he may well have just cribbed this from places like Answers in Genesis. Anyway, I'm tired of this time and God argument, so we're skipping past the rest of it.
The followers of evolution, the students of Darwin, they were forced to modify everything that Darwin said.
Well, yeah, Origin of Species was published more than 160 years ago. We've learned a lot since then. I would be shocked if any scientific text from 160 years ago was so accurate that it could be used unmodified today as a source to learn science. If you want to learn about evolution, I don't recommend Darwin's writings. They are, at this point, not science. They are a part of the history of science. It's not a bad thing that science updates ideas to conform to new data. That's how we get less and less wrong.
So basically today, what they learn today about evolution is nothing. Almost nothing is similar to what their master, Darwin, started. Why? Because they got stuck.
Few things here. One, it's actually quite similar. Darwin's central idea of variability in organisms, natural selection, and sexual selection are still very central to the current understanding of evolution. Next, Darwin isn't seen as a master. Look, Yosef may look to Moshe as his guiding prophet, but science doesn't care about prophets or masters, it cares about data. And if you have them, then good. If you don't, then your fame or previous discoveries don't matter. Last, evolution isn't stuck. I'm not even sure what that would mean.
I read a long article about it, that it's been constantly modified. His students saw that what he wrote, eventually they couldn't continue with that. So they constantly had to modify it, and what we learn today is different than what he said. The reason is because it's only a theory, and there are millions of theories.
I've already covered why, when talking about a theory, it's incredibly stupid to say that something is only a theory. But yeah, theories are modified when new data comes in.
One of the claims they make is that there's lots of explosions, random explosions, and one of them worked out, and something was created.
Who says that? I want names, because that's a new one on me.
But everybody that is a little bit clever knows right away that something like this can never be. Why? Do you know a little bit about the human brain?
I do.
How many connections are inside a brain of a person that is the size of an apple? How many connections? Who knows?
I guess this is an embryology question, because at that size, you're not full term. So I did a bit of quick math based on the volume of an apple being 187 milliliters, and came to the conclusion that he's basically talking about an embryo that's about 7 centimeters or 2.8 inches long. So we're talking week 12 or 13 of pregnancy. I'm having quite bad luck at finding how many neuron connections are made by this time, although I can tell you that at this point in the brain development, the cerebellum is still smooth and the brain is only about 2 centimeters long. But either way, let's get ready for the big number, therefore God argument.
10 trillion connections.
Okay, that was big number. Big number, people. If you have that on your pseudoscience bingo card, make sure you mark off big number, therefore God.
Basically, in case you didn't know, if you take all the telephone companies in the world, all the wireless, all the internet wires.
Nope, we're not going to have an irrelevant comparison to human technology that just reinforces that brains are neat. We all know that brains are neat, and it's not an argument for or against God that they are.
Now it gets even better when you know that 80% of the brain is gel, liquid.
I mean, that's true for most organs because water is vital to cellular function, but if he means that the actual tissue flows and conforms to the shape of its container, then no, it's not liquid. That's why preserved brains can simply be scooped out of the skull and put in a jar. If the brain itself was liquid, it would just mush into the bottom of the jar, assuming it's more dense than the medium it's in. And it is in the case of formaldehyde.
Only 20% is really material. The rest is all water.
Water is material too. I can't tell if he means that water is like some kind of magical spiritual substance that isn't made of matter, but that's certainly what he seemed to imply. But either way, I do think this statement indicates that he's probably meaning that water in the brain tissue is the majority of the mass of the brain, which is true, and that he's not thinking that the brain itself is liquid that would flow. That's good.
And the wires inside the brain are so thin that if I pull a hair from your head and pick it up in the sun, it will be hard to see it, right? It's so thin, it's very hard to see it. Divide this air by 1,000. That's how thin the wires are.
If I assume by wire he means axon, then we can look at this with real numbers. In case you're wondering, neuron axa are usually between 0.3 micrometers and 20 micrometers, whereas hair is usually about 70 micrometers. So really the factor is between 2,300 and 3.5. So there are cases where he's right, but also many where the difference in thickness is far, far smaller than he said. Also, if you had biology is complicated, therefore God on your pseudoscience bingo card, mark that off, and I'm going to cut him off until he makes an argument. As I said, we all know that the brain is really cool and complicated and whatnot.
In order for a brain like this to be created by just an explosion,
which isn't a position of anyone I'm aware of,
without a planner, statistically it's impossible. There's no chance something like this can happen in any theoretical possibility you cannot find that a brain like this was made by a random explosion.
I agree, a random explosion couldn't make a human brain. But that's not what anyone said did make it. Instead, it's the product of very non-random selection acting on essentially random mutation. This, in biology and in computing, can create extremely complex structures that humans have trouble understanding. Saying that the Big Bang is an explosion is misleading, and implying that it is the proximate cause of the existence of human brains, according to science, is even more misleading. And you know what really bothers me? He's in a classroom full of kids. He's teaching these kids not to take science seriously. And maybe they'll listen to him when he says that blowing hot air from a hairdryer down your throat will cure a deadly disease, because he said that. Or that if you have a kid with autism, it's your fault for being so sinful. He said that too. These kids deserve better. They deserve a real education in the sciences. They do not deserve Jewish Matt Powell.
Plus, all the explosions, no one ever found any record in the world for all the attempts.
Excuse me, the did you just say?
As far as I know, these explosions he's talking about are the Big Bang, and no, of course no one wrote a record about the start of the Big Bang. No one existed to write anything, nor did matter exist that could be written on.
If there was all kinds of material attempts, explosions and explosions and explosions, where are they? It should be what's left from those explosions somewhere in the world. Where are they? Nobody ever found it.
It literally is the world. The universe is the result of the Big Bang. Everything around you is the result ultimately of the Big Bang. The very space-time in which all matter exists is itself being generated by the Big Bang as I speak and as you hear this.
Plus, if the person is developed, nobody ever found the middle connection step. They have the beginning, they have the end, but the middle step, how it happened, nobody ever found, besides two discoveries that eventually was proven as false. When they tried to see, oh, here is the middle connection, how a person started here and he ended up here.
If your elitist East Coast evolution is real, why has no one found the missing link between modern humans and ancient apes?
We did find it. It's called Homo erectus.
Then you have proven my case, sir. For no one has found the link between apes and this Homo erectus.
Yes, they have. It's called Homo habilis.
Aha! But no one has found the missing link between ape and the so-called Homo habilis.
Yes, they have. It's called Australopithecus africanus.
Oh, I've got you now. Fair enough. But where, then, is the missing link between apes and this Darwinius Macellai? Answer me that, Professor.
Oh, okay, granted that one missing link is still missing. But just because we haven't found it doesn't mean it doesn't exist.
Pshaw! Things don't exist simply because you believe in them. Thus saith the almighty creature in the sky!
Nobody ever found such thing. Besides, why all the monkeys did not become people?
Okay, everybody, that's why are there still monkeys? Why are there still monkeys? Make sure you mark off why are there still monkeys on your pseudoscience bingo cards. But, okay, why are there still monkeys besides humans? Well, because monkeys are good at being monkeys in the places where they live. They didn't have the same selection pressures that affected the ancestors of humans, so they didn't evolve in the same way. If you're a species like a vervet monkey, hanging out in the woods, eating shoots, leaves, bark, and fruit, and occasionally getting a bit of meat in your diet, and you're successfully breeding and hanging out in the trees and whatnot, you know, doing typical vervet things, then there's no pressure to become a giant-headed, naked biped. Every step along that road would make it harder for you to do vervet stuff. But if you're an ancient ape in an increasingly arid environment with shrinking forests and encroaching savannas, and you rely on the trees and alarm calls for protection less and less, with food being ever harder to find, then doing your basic monkey stuff isn't working out, and it's time to adapt or die. Luckily for my audience, and Yosef himself, the human lineage adapted by becoming a bunch of upright walking, sweaty, naked, balloon-headed monkeys. While other monkeys who managed to stick around in other environments didn't bother with any of that. Humans aren't the end goal of evolution. Evolution has no end goals.
If a monkey eventually became a person and lost his tail,
a population of monkeys. Remember, evolution is a matter of population genetics. It doesn't happen to individuals.
and he's able to stand straight and to talk, and he became what he became, why there are so many thousands of different species of monkey that they did not develop?
They did develop. No modern species of monkey is identical to the ancestral monkey. It's just that they specialize for different niches and environments than humans did. So because of that, they are not humans.
Let me give you an example of what they say about the giraffe. The giraffe has a very long neck. Everybody understand. One of the claims they say that in the beginning the giraffe had a short neck.
It's not just that we say this, it's that we have the fossils of ancient giraffids, so we know what they were like. We have organisms like Canthumerics and Metilanotherium, which, while having necks that would be considered long compared to, say, a cow, were nothing compared to the modern giraffe. And as we get closer and closer to modern Camelopardatus, these fossil giraffids look more and more like Camelopardatus. It's almost like the fossil record matches the predictions of evolution about giraffids. But also there's the okapi, which is a modern short-necked giraffe that is a low browser from the jungle. So not all lineages of giraffes went for high-browsing, long-neck morphologies.
But since the giraffe is trying to get leaves from the trees, and it was constantly stretching the neck over millions of years, according to their theory, so every generation, the neck of the giraffe grew by 1 millimeter. And another generation, over millions of years, it became 10 or 15 feet long. Sounds a little bit logical, right? A little bit logical? Okay.
Except that this is Lamarckism, an idea that has been debunked for almost 200 years at this point. No one thinks that giraffe necks are long because stretching is passed down to offspring. is that those offspring with mutations resulting in longer necks were better able to survive, and so they had more children, many of whom also had longer necks. And as a result of persistent directional selection, an extreme morphology was achieved in one group of giraffids.
But it's very, very foolish. Who can tell me why it's very foolish?
Because as a rule, traits acquired in life are not passed on to offspring. The children of amputees aren't born with missing limbs.
Here, let's start.
How come the giraffe's neck doesn't keep on growing?
Very good. Good point. I never thought of that. Go ahead.
Why did the other animals?
Very nice.
Why did the other animals' necks grow?
That's another point, yeah.
Because the babies have long necks, and their babies are newborns, they weren't stretching.
No, the babies already, because over the period of years, that race, that species, is already changed, modified itself. That's it. So now it's in the DNA, in a gene already. Go ahead.
I think the fact that at this point we still haven't heard one of these kids point out that this is not the current understanding of science, and that this type of acquired trait can't be passed down, is a testament to how woefully undereducated these kids are in science. This school staff should be ashamed of themselves.
We see we have monkeys that only some of them developed in humans. How come there are no giraffes left with short necks? How come all of them, like giraffes, grew long necks, but monkeys don't?
That's very good. 3 good points.
What? These giraffes the entire life, they're not going for these leaves the entire life. Once they try once, they're putting their head back down. It's not stretching.
You basically saying something why a neck of a giraffe wouldn't stretch. But for those who claim that it stretch, is it possible? Maybe yes. Maybe if a person, I'm giving you an example, if a person's arm would be stretched constantly by a machine, constantly, so maybe after 30 years, one hand will be longer than the other. You're right. It doesn't mean that his son will have the same thing. It doesn't mean that if the neck stretch, it changed and modified the genes. That's a very good point.
Yeah, it's the point that matters. And because all of evolutionary biology is well aware of this fact, I can't imagine why it was brought up in the first place. I mean, would he also like to bring up the problems with the luminiferous ether to counter modern science too? Okay, I'm cutting out this interminable Socratic method section. Let's see what Mr. Mizrachi says about why his straw man is so silly.
I'll tell you one good answer. You know that the giraffe, when the giraffe comes to the lake to drink, it has to put all this long neck down. And there's lots of blood who slides right into the brain. Lots of blood. It's a huge body. You saw the giraffe. So imagine you take big buckets full of blood, and once the giraffe bend the head down, you spill it right to the neck. It goes all the way down to the brain. What would happen to the brain? Explode.
Except that the giraffe has what amounts to check valves in its neck to prevent excessive blood pressure in its brain.
Right? If you hang a person upside down for a few hours, that's it. His brain, it can die.
So, how long can a human survive upside down actually varies considerably. Some people can die in just a few minutes, others can last a couple of days, but yeah, you shouldn't spend extended periods upside down.
But the giraffe has a valve. You know the valve that they have in the trucks for pollution? It keeps flipping over when the smoke comes out, and then it blocks that other things won't fall in. So every time the air push it out, the gas, so it opens. Then it closes automatically. The giraffe, every time the giraffe bend the head down, this valve closes. That the brain won't go, all the blood don't go into the brain and explode the brain. Is it possible that over millions of years, all of a sudden, since the neck of the giraffe became so long, the valve showed up from nowhere?
No, but that's not anyone's claim. These valves are actually structurally fairly simple extensions of the wall of the blood vessels that form a sort of flap that opens to allow blood to flow in the normal direction, but when it flows the other way, it tends to close. This occurs because these bits of extra tissue grow in the direction of the flow as shown on screen. This is pretty important to the giraffe, but no one thinks they came from nothing. It's not hard to see how even moderately long-necked species could benefit from a much reduced form of this, preventing overpressure, but not as effectively as the full valve system. But when your neck isn't so long, it's not as important to prevent overpressure, as there won't be much of it anyway. And hey, we actually have an example of a closely related species that doesn't need fancy check valves in its veins. It's the okapi. Okapis and giraffes are in the same family, Giraffidae, which is in the superfamily Giraffoidea. which includes the American pronghorn, and together they are part of a larger group, Pecora, which also includes Cervidae, Bovidae, and Muscidae. That is, the true deer, the sheep, goats, antelope, and cattle, and the musk deer. Pecora is part of the wider group of Artiodactyla, which also includes hippos, whales, and camels.
That's smashed this entire theory. If it was without a valve, then they still had maybe 1% chance that there's some logic into what they say.
See, this gets at the common anti-evolution idea that evolution is a serial process. If you have something that's basically an antelope with weirdo horns, and you're going to get it to turn into a giraffe, you don't first make the legs longer, then make the necks longer, then finally put in those valves real fast. The whole morphology changes at once. The legs and the neck get longer in tandem, and as blood pressure in the brain becomes a problem, those animals with even a tiny bit of extra tissue in their blood vessels, pointed in the right way to lower it, when the animal has its head lowered, do better. And this frees them up to become even more extreme in their morphology, causing more pressure to enhance those bits of extra tissues, those proto-valves, if you will. So as blood pressure becomes more and more important, the solutions to the problem become more and more specialized. But they did not need to start out that way, nor did the animals have to wait until they were vital to life to develop them.
Once you see the valve, you know that the original giraffe was created with this valve, because evolution would not create a new system and would fall exactly where it belongs.
It didn't create a new system. That's all still part of the circulatory system. All evolutionary novelty is also a modification of what came before.
Let me give you another example. Yes?
How do you know that wasn't born with the valve with you?
Well, if the neck was short, why do you need a valve? Other animals that have short necks don't need a valve.
This specific animal was born with a valve. They have something else.
But what for? We see that the animals and people have what they need for their living, right? But if you don't need it, what do you need a valve? Millions of other animals don't have it. All of a sudden, one has a valve.
That kid asks a good question. What if the first giraffe didn't have such a long neck, and so it doesn't need the valve yet? Which is basically what I've been saying. Let's look at Paleotragus, a mid-Miocene giraffid that was widely distributed across Eurasia and Africa. It had a fairly long neck, but not so long as the modern giraffe. It probably didn't need full-blown giraffe check valves in its neck, but then it may well have had problems with blood pressure when getting a drink of water. It could have been so severe that rather than risking death, it might be risking passing out, which is still dangerous. But could this not have been mitigated with not full check valves, like a giraffe, but with a partial form of the system, where blood vessels grow smaller bits of tissue in the direction of flow, which do not prevent backflow, but simply greatly reduce its bed as a result of greatly increasing the resistance to flow? More like a Tesla valve than a movable check valve in terms of effectiveness. Linked in the description below is an article on the blog Naturalis Historia by Christian biologist and counter-creationist Joel Duff, talking about the issues with saying that the giraffe neck is specially designed, yet acknowledging that giraffids evidently have a common ancestor. I highly recommend it. It's called Young Earth Creationism Leads the Short-Necked Okapi to Identify as a Giraffe.
Now let me give you another example. If we are in the middle of the ocean...
I've spent years of my life there. I'm familiar with it. Go on.
And I say to you, we are on a boat, and I say to you, I want to throw a quarter to the bottom of the ocean. In the middle of the ocean, thousands of miles, I throw a quarter all the way to the bottom of the ocean. And now I'm going to say, here is another quarter. Anyone that will be able to throw another quarter in the ocean and would land exactly on my quarter will get $1 million cash from me.
That would be a hard bet to win, as the exact trajectory of the coin is going to be affected by eddy currents, Brownian motion, minute differences in the mass between coins, and possible interference from life forms.
Why am I so confident and so generous? What are the odds that your quarter will fall right on mine? Is there any chance?
Well, of course there's a chance, and it's small, but I'm not even sure how we would go about calculating that a priori like we can with dice rolls. There are too many unknown variables to create an effective model. We'd simply need to run the experiment a lot of times and observe the chances. But the chances are not zero, because that would indicate that the event was physically impossible. I see no reason it should be impossible.
No chance. No, not even hardly. There's no chance. No chance.
Why does anyone take this man seriously when he says absurd things like this? Of course there's a chance. What would make absolutely sure that two coins never landed on each other at the bottom of the ocean? Is there a coin naiad who doesn't like it when coins overlap, and so she makes sure it doesn't happen? I mean, last I checked, Jews don't believe in naiads, but maybe I'm wrong. I'll go ask a Jewish friend. Okay, seems that Jews overall do not believe in naiads.
No chance. Now, why do I tell you this story? Did you ever see the shape of the Milky Way? The stars, how does it look?
Like a road made of milky fluid, hence the name.
The shape of a banana, right? Shape of a banana.
I mean, kinda, I guess. It's a weird way to say it, but it's not like he's blatantly wrong. It does taper from the middle at either end, which a banana does, but it doesn't really have a curve that way, although it can look like it does from very wide-angle lenses used to capture the whole thing in the sky at once. But in real life, with the human eyes, that's not how it looks. It looks quite straight.
Except one star. One star was moved to the right. It's like a hand picked it up and put it on the side. Which one? Which star? Earth. The world that we live in.
Earth isn't a star. It's a planet. The sun is a star. And what does it mean for Earth to be off to the right? The right of what? The galaxy? Galaxies don't have a left or a right. They have a spin direction, poles, normal and anti-normal directions, but like, not left or right.
If the world was where it was supposed to be,
I really want to know how we determine where Earth is supposed to be.
in the same track of this banana, but get burned immediately. We couldn't live there because it's too close to the sun.
Does Yosef here think that the Milky Way is inside the solar system and closer to the sun than the Earth is? Is he a geocentrist? I'm so confused right now.
Or if it would be anywhere else in space, we couldn't really live. In case you didn't know, you know there are trillions of stars.
Yes, I'm aware that there's an enormous number of stars in the universe, a few billion of them in the Milky Way, one of which we're all orbiting.
Trillions of stars. And the stars, some of them has hundreds of degrees below zero.
I'm sorry, cold stars? We're doing cold stars now? Okay, well, let's get into what a star is, because apparently this man skipped like 4th grade science class. A star is, by definition, an object composed of plasma in which nuclear fusion takes place. So if it's not made of plasma or it has no nuclear fusion, it's a different kind of object, like a gas giant or a protostar. Now, the thing about both plasma and fusion is that they need to be hot. So by definition, if an object is a star, it must be extremely hot by human standards, and if an object is extremely cold, it cannot be a star.
And some of them hundreds of degrees above zero, which means if you come near it, you get burned immediately.
I mean, it depends on how close. NASA managed to get a probe into the sun's atmosphere, but generally, yes, close encounters with stars are not recommended.
Or if you come near it, you freeze immediately. One of the two.
No, first, there are no cold stars, but second, cold doesn't reach out like heat does. Cold is simply the relative lack of heat. So if you're not in contact with a supercold object that would allow heat to conduct directly, it has to rely on the less efficient method of radiative heat transfer. That means your subtle glow of infrared light that you're giving off no matter where you are in space is all that the cold stellar mass object could use to transfer heat from you to itself. And it can't make you give off that radiation faster. You're going to give it off at peak wavelength and intensity based on your current temperature. So you could pass millimeters away from an object in space that is just above absolute freezing, and you wouldn't get any colder than you would had you not been there.
The only stars so far that they found that have temperatures that you can live comfortable life and have water and oxygen and everything, and the gravity is exactly what we need.
Well, the gravity is a function of the planet, not the star, but every star has a habitable zone where temperatures on a planet orbiting in this zone would be comparable to Earth's.
It's Earth.
Which again, isn't a star, it's a planet that orbits a star.
Now remember, the only place in space is endless, much bigger than the ocean. The water in the world is 72%. 72% of the world is water.
Well, about 72% of the surface is covered in water. Overall, it's a tiny fraction of the whole planet, most of which is under the surface. What with the Earth being a three-dimensional object and all.
The world is a tiny star. 72% of a tiny star, it's nothing compared to space.
Again, the Earth isn't a star, but comets are largely made up of water ice. There's a lot of water on Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and there are whole clouds of it in space. Water is the most common compound in the universe.
So space is endless. So now let me ask you, if Earth would be anywhere else in space, we will all die before we were even created. We couldn't live.
Incorrect. All stars have a habitable zone, And even within the habitable zone of our star, we could have been in a fairly wide range of orbits between where Venus is and where Mars is, and still have had liquid water just fine.
Nothing. Everything get evaporated or freeze, one of the two. There's no life. The only place you can have life is where our world was put, in space. Just like the quarter that I said before. It had to fall exactly here. It will fall a little bit to the right, a little bit to the left. There's no life. Now, do you think something like this can be coincidence? What do you think?
Okay, let's tweak that thought experiment to see how it works. Instead of needing to hit his randomly tossed coin, let's say we have a bunch of circles on the bottom of the ocean, trillions in fact, and you get to go through tens of trillions of coins to represent all the planets. Now, each circle on the ocean is a different size and it represents the habitable zone of a star in the universe. Now, do you think that some coins will land on, not in, on, these circles? Almost certainly. Now, the vast majority won't, but when you're throwing about 10 trillion coins at about a trillion circles, some will. And that's how the universe is. There are a lot of places where life couldn't form, but there are also a lot of places where perhaps it could have. Alright, well, with that mind-numbingly dumb take on astronomy, I think we're going to call it because I can feel my brain starting to want to jump out from my ear and escape this madness. Anyway, I really hope you liked this video. If you did, hit the like button. If you didn't, hey, hit the dislike button and tell me what you didn't like in the comments. Either way, I do hope you subscribe, because if you subscribe and turn on the notifications with the bell icon, you'll always be notified when there's more Dapper Dino content. I'm the Dapper Dinosaur. Thanks for watching this video, but before you go, I'd like to take a minute to thank my channel members and patrons, especially those pledging $20 or above. Bob Knob, Ben Tovand, Denny5252, Ian Chen, John Ackerman, Chris Love, Landed Knoll, Sphincter of Doom, and Patrick Dennis. Without the help of the people whose name you see on screen right now, this channel simply wouldn't exist. If you'd like to join the team, there's links in the description to my Patreon, as well as a join button right below this video that will allow you to join on YouTube. Joining gets you access to an exclusive Discord server, early access to my videos, often more than a month in advance, as well as other perks depending on how much you decide to pledge. However, if a monthly or annual pledge isn't for you, there are other ways to support the channel, including a merch store down in the description, and hey, just liking and sharing this video always helps a lot. Thank you very much. I'm the Dapper Dinosaur.